Let's go ahead and jump right in. So good afternoon, everyone. I'm Nsini Umoh. I'm a TBI Program Director at NINDS, and thank you so much for joining this webinar today. So as many of you know, FITBIR is supported by a collaboration between the NIH and the Department of Defense, as well as the VA, with the mission to advance research through data sharing and increase investigator collaboration. So FITBIR is a common platform for exchanging data, protocols, and other research-related information. So there was a new policy related to Notice 23046, and it's designed to optimize the use of current FITBIR resources and centralize federally supported TBI-related research data. So the policy modification applies to all NINDS-funded TBI research involving human subjects, and it also satisfies the requirements that are defined in the overarching NIH data management and sharing policy, which, as many of you know, that went into effect on January 25th. So previously, studies that were clinical trials, ancillary studies of clinical trials, studies that were awarded under certain funding opportunities or exceeded a certain direct cost limit were the only studies that were required to submit their data to FITBIR. But now, all NINDS-funded clinical TBI research projects must submit their data, regardless of budget amount or grant mechanism. Specifically, if you do not meet this criteria that I just mentioned, you'll need to submit your data to the meta-study module within FITBIR. You'll need a FITBIR account to submit and access data within the meta-study module, and data submission must be accompanied by several documents, including detailed protocols and standard operating procedures that were employed to gather and collect your data, a data dictionary of data elements that were used, the data files themselves, whether that's the raw and unprocessed data, standard settings of data acquisition, for example, imaging acquisition, and any information for understanding the various data types. And lastly, in terms of timeline, a study is expected to submit their data either at the time an article is published or at the end of the period of performance, whichever comes first. So with that, I will hand it over to my colleague, Kevin, with FITBIR Operations, who will walk us through how to submit data to the Meta Studies module within FITBIR, and we'll save some time at the end to address any questions. So Kevin, I'll hand it to you.
Thank you, Nsini, for that introduction. My name's Kevin. I'm one of the FITBIR Operation team members. We also have some FITBIR Operation team members on the chat too. So if you have any general questions, you can engage the chat. And also if you have some policy related questions, Nsini will be monitoring the chat, and we'll also have time at the end for a general Q&A. So the topic for today's webinar is the meta study module, and I will go through some basics about what FITBIR is, what are modules, how to use the meta study. And so let's just start with FITBIR. If you're not familiar with what FITBIR is a collaborative biomedical informatics system that was designed to support research in traumatic brain injury and to accelerate scientific discovery and treatment. And the mission of FITBIR is accomplished by these four main aims, which is to define standards across studies to enable cross-site meta-analyses and data comparisons. And this is primarily done through the use of NINDS TBI CDEs. Also, FITBIR deploys a set of useful tools. FITBIR is actually an instance of an underlying informatics platform called BRICS. There are actually other instances of BRICS as well for different research communities, such as the Parkinson's research community, eye diseases at NEI, and various other ones. FITBIR also aims to promote the sharing of quality research data throughout the TBI research community, and FITBIR can support many different types of data in our repository. Phenotypic data, genomic, imaging, pedigree, what have you. So as I mentioned earlier, FITBIR is composed of modules. And you can see here the main 7 modules. I'll give a brief sort of introduction to each one, although today's primary focus will be the meta study. So let's start first with accounts. This is where users manage their various account data, metadata, their privileges, and other account-related activities. Then we have the data dictionary. As I mentioned earlier, FITBIR uses NINDS TBI CDEs, and the data dictionary essentially stores all of our data elements as well as forms that have various data elements. We have our data repository, and this is where studies that conform to NINDS TBI CDEs will submit their data. So the data actually has to be, structured and use data elements in the system. Now, this is a little bit different from what I'll be going over today with the meta study. There aren't strict data requirements for the meta study as in the data repository. And if you have any questions about that, you can ask me later or reach out to ops. Now, in order to get data into the data repository, each participant needs to have a GUID, which is a unique identifier that removes PII from a participant's information. And this is relevant if you're submitting data to the data repository. And as we'll see, it won't be relevant for submitting data to the meta study. We also have the Proforms module. This is not highly utilized in FITBIR, although other BRICS instances do make use of this. It's for real-time data capture. So you can, if you're interviewing a participant, enter the data into the system and it immediately goes to your repository. And again, this won't be relevant for today's webinar. And then we have the query tool. This is available to our data access users. These are users who want to explore the data in FITBIR. They want to aggregate data across studies. And we will cover a little bit of the query tool today because it does have ties to the meta study and they can interact. So for today's webinar, here are the main objectives. We will go over what the meta study module is. We will go over the various use cases for data submission. That's relevant to, as Nsini mentioned, the new NIH data sharing policy and the NINDS TBI funded data sharing policy. But also we'll go over the use case for just general data access users. So I will give a couple demonstrations on how to create a meta study. If you're submitting primary data to it, how to add associated files to it from your computer. If you are a data access user, how to add data from the query tool to a meta study to create, a meta study proper. And also publishing a meta study. So a meta study in its original form contains findings from other studies in the BRICS system, in this case FITBIR, that have been aggregated by researchers to conduct additional analyses, so meta study. And additionally, the information contained in a meta study can be referenced in publications through the creation of a digital object identifier. This unique code can be put in your publications. People can click the link. It'll take you to the FITBIR study profile. And if you want to access that study's data, you'd have to create a FITBIR account. But also the meta study can be used as a means for storing and referencing results of analyses and primary study data that's not otherwise in the BRICS system. So 2 use cases that I'll be going over today. So, we generally have 2 broad classes of users, data submitters, data users. If you are a data submitter, there's 2 account types that you can qualify for. Generally, TBI funded studies that have meet certain requirements will be required to submit to the data repository. And we call those data submitters. In order to get the data into the repository, you do have to conform to standardization, which would take the form of using CDEs and form structures available in the system, and also attaching a GUID to your participant data. But we won't go over this route because this other account type is actually what you'll be using if you're required to submit your TBI funded study to the meta study. And it's just a simple process. You'll request your account and you will get access to the meta study. You actually won't get access to some of these other modules as they won't be necessary for you to upload your study data to the meta study. Now, if you're a data accessor, you would request a data access account, and that workflow is similar. You get your account, then you would have access to the data repository and the query tool, and that's where you'll be able to aggregate data and then send it to a meta study that you create for the purposes of reproducibility, having a location for other researchers to explore your data that you cite in a publication. So with that introduction out of the way, I will first start with a demo of creating a meta study for the purposes of NINDS-funded TBI study data submission requirements. So let me go ahead and get out of presentation mode. So what I'll go ahead and do first is go to the FITBIR public site. You'll definitely want to check this out as it has a lot of resources on FITBIR, how to use the system. We have tutorial videos, a lot of good stuff in here. So you'll want to check this out. But in order to log in, you click this button. If you don't have an account, you'll want to click this link here to request an account. And we can cover accounts towards the end of this slide, and we'll also be sending out a sort of one-pager to just kind of get you started with getting an account. So let's say we already have an account. You'll log in. And you'll first be taken to this workspace that shows you all the modules available. If you do not have privileges to a certain module, it'll appear grayed out. Let's go ahead and create a meta study. So you can either click this icon here or up here in the menu bar, click meta study. And what you'll see first is the table of meta studies. Now I'm in an admin, so right now you can see draft meta studies. If you're not an admin, you'll only be able to see published meta studies. In order to create a meta study, just go over here to this menu and click Create Meta Study. So here's where you're just going to enter some initial information to initialize your meta study. So we'll start with just details on your meta study. The title, we'll call this NINDS TBI funded meta study demo. You'll want to enter in some information about this study. We'll just call that abstract for now. You'll also want to enter some aims. And since this isn't required for creating the meta study initially, you can always leave this blank and come back to it and edit it. You can fill out some metadata with regards to your study, the recruitment status, we'll say completed, the study type, was this a clinical trial, observational trial, etc. We'll click observational. Maybe you had some control groups, how many? Was there an intervention? We'll say no, but if there was, you could fill out all sorts of therapeutic agents or types, models. You can include a link to your study or other information. You'll want to fill out this research management table. So in order to create a meta study, you do have to have a primary principal investigator listed. So I'll list myself here. Part of FITBIR. You can also upload a file if you so choose. Some study information. Is there funding for this study? Let's go down to, or you can just type NIH, NINDS. You can include the funding amount. We encourage you to add grant ID information as well. I'll leave that blank for now. So we'll go ahead and click next. Now at this point, you could add various forms of documentation, URLs, files, but generally you may not have that ready, so we can just skip that for now. Same with data artifacts. You can upload all sorts of files in queries. We'll save that for later. You'll also want to add some keywords to your meta study to make it more searchable. Let's say our study involves moderate TBI populations. Let's say GCS is a component of our study. We'll add that. Yeah, we encourage the users to add as many useful keywords because it'll make it more findable for other data access users. So we'll go ahead and just preview this now. Things look good for now. You can always edit later. So we'll create and finish. So now we have our draft meta study. You can see the status here, the option to edit, delete, and also edit permissions. So if you have a team, a study team that has multiple FITBIR users, you can grant them permissions to view this draft meta study. So in order to do that, you would just click edit permissions. You would add to the table and find another user who's part of the study team. You can give them read, write, admin, or owner privileges. So now they are part of this meta study, and you can save it. Great. So let's say we've finished the study. Now we've organized our data. We're ready to submit it to the meta study. What you'll want to do is click edit. And let's say we want to first start out by adding some documentation. So let's open up a file and let's say that we have a protocol we want to include, a Word document. We can go ahead and do that. We'll call it analysis protocol. And then a useful description. Although this you may want to add more than just study protocol, but in the interest of time, let's move on to the data. So this is where you'll want to add your study's data files, possibly data dictionaries, scripts that you've created to analyze the data. So let's just say that this is our local directory. This is what we want to be in the meta study. And this is how we suggest you organize your meta study. Just have a directory with all of the content that will be in the meta study. And there aren't strict organizational requirements, but you may want to look at various open source data sets maybe on GitHub and see how they organized their data and scripts. There are some good practices that you could use. So let's say we have a data folder that has raw, processed, clean data. What we'll need to do initially is zip this data, because currently the meta study doesn't accept unzipped folders. So we'll go ahead and add some of our data. And we'll say results, data, study data. That's giving me an issue. Let me go ahead and just upload a CSV. Instead, let's say we're uploading this record with 50,000 rows. Okay, that's unexpected. All right, looks like we have a little bit of bug, but essentially you'll just use this table to upload your data, and we are making enhancements to this process as well, so it'll be easier to do bulk uploads and fill out the metadata for your files. So this is where you will upload your data, but let's go back to the main table and let's look at a meta study that has been published so you can get an idea of how users are utilizing this module. So this is actually not a primary study. This is a secondary analysis of data that exists in FITBIR, and that's the second demo I'm going to be going over today. But you can see here, they've created a DOI for their study. They can put that in their publications. It'll take them to the FITBIR public site where you can learn more about the study. Here, they've added documentation. So if you're viewing this, you can download these files. We will be enhancing this user experience to make it allow you to be able to download everything in bulk. And here are the data files that they uploaded. And at this point, I'll also mention that you can certainly use the user interface, but if you're a little more tech savvy, we do offer APIs for all of the modules. So you could certainly access FITBIR meta study data through an API and just pull this all directly into your working environment. They've added some keywords and labels. And there's also this last tab here, that's a data access report. So this meta study was just published, so nobody's downloaded the data yet, but as an owner of the meta study, you'll be able to see who's downloading your data from FITBIR. So you can get some nice statistics on the popularity of your data. And this meta study was just published, as I mentioned, and they actually created a nice little R-Shiny app to accompany their analysis. And they made that accessible too, so you could either pull it up here or download it and run it yourself. But here, you know, this study looked at a number of different outcome variables, depression, and they looked at a number of different studies in our system and provided a nice little graph for people to explore the data. So certainly if you're interested in this kind of visualization and you want to, you know, share your results with the FITBIR community, you can certainly take measures such as this. So what I'll do now is the demo for meta studies that are engaging in secondary analyses of data that's already in the system. So what you'll want to do first is create a meta study, because the goal of this is to actually send the data that we're collecting to this meta study. And that's important because if you want other researchers to possibly create your data analysis pipeline, it's good to have the starting point of the raw data. This is what we started with in FITBIR in our pipeline, and so filling all that information out in the meta study will be helpful down the line for other users. So let's call this meta study data access user demo. And I'll kind of speed through this stuff because it's pretty much the same. Call it meta-analysis. We'll have to make someone a PI. Great. Let's go ahead and create it. We've created our draft meta study. Now let's go ahead and actually send aggregated data from the query tool to our meta study. So you'll want to go over to the query tool, and that will upload. And what you may first notice here is on the right, you'll have all of the studies that you have access to presented for you. And if you open them up, you can see which forms they've submitted data to. And you can add them individually to your data cart, or you can add all of a study's data to your cart at once. Now, of course, you can search for data at the study level, but you may want to actually pinpoint certain forms that many of these studies have submitted data against. So in order to do that, what we would do is go to this series of tabs here and actually look at things from the form level. So if we click that, you'll notice now this table has changed. Now we have the form structures in FITBIR that studies have submitted data against. So let's go ahead and look up the GCS form, the Glasgow Coma Scale, very common instrument in TBI research. You'll notice that we do have quite a few options. We do have a sort of standard Glasgow Coma Scale form, which is this one, and you'll see 15 studies have submitted data against it, data for about 5,000 or so subjects. But we also have some appendices that are related to GCS or study-specific modifications. So as a data accessor, you want to keep that in mind, that forms may have modifications, so you may need to add other forms to your cart as well and join them. And you can either join them through the user interface or offline. But for now, let's just go ahead and add these 15 studies worth of GCS data. You can also search by data elements as well, or specific GUIDs. We won't do that now in the interest of time, but let's say we want to do some initial filtering of our data cart. We will go now to step 2, refine data. You can certainly download all the data in your cart and just process it offline. And that's possible, although if you are creating a meta study and you want other users to be able to recreate the steps that you took in FITBIR, you'll want to send your data to the meta study as well. And so in order to do that, we're going to load up this into the data view table. And depending on how many records there are, it may take some time. For instance, we just pulled 180,000 rows worth of GCS data across 15 studies. And if this is the raw data set that you're working with and you want to do post-processing offline, you can always just send this to the meta study by clicking send to meta study and looking for your meta study. You can send the data there as well. But what we're going to do now is just add a couple different filters to this data set. You know, let's say we are looking into some aspect of TBI outcomes based on the GCS instrument for a certain age range, certain population. You know, maybe we have some hypothesis about 20 to 40-year-old participants or patients. We can add that filter by clicking here on the hamburger menu, applying a filter such as this. We can run that query. You can see now we have a subset of our 140,000. Now we have 88,000 participants. But let's say we want to filter this even more. Let's say, we're really interested in what happens 0 to 7 days after an injury or after the assessment was performed. We will click Run Query, and we've further reduced our data set to about 52,000 rows. And you can essentially go crazy with it with the query logic. You can add as many filters as you'd like. You can add some combinatorial logic. In this case, we just did and, so 20 to 40-year-olds, 0 to 7 days since baseline. But if you did or, it would perform an or operation. So let's say, this is our starting point. We want to send this to the meta study. Let's go ahead and do that. We will send to meta study, find our meta study. You'll want to save the query filters to the meta study. That way other users can just recreate your query really quickly. They don't have to click all these buttons and add these steps. They can just load your query in and it'll perform the same operations. Give it a little description. Let's say ages 20 to 40 and 0 to 7 days since baseline. We're going to go ahead and send that data. Description and click save. Now we can go ahead to our meta study and check on that. And depending on how much data you're sending over, if you're sending a bunch of imaging data, it may take a little bit of time for it to appear in the data table. So let's click our meta study and just confirm. So right now only the query's shown up. It may take some time for the actual data to show up. But if we click this test query, we can see the various filters applied and the forms used. We can see here the 15 studies that are part of this set. We can also view the various filters and the data elements that comprise the form. So the query logic is here. You can see the age, range, days since baseline. You could also just copy and paste it here if you'd like to, but we recommend just using defined queries that are saved. You can also save your query this way for users and share it personally with other users. Let's see. Grant them permission. And so if you have a bunch of saved queries on your end, you can always re-access them by going back to step 1. I'm going to clear our data cart, have a fresh slate, but let's say I want to, actually I didn't save that one, but let's see if there's any program defined queries. Not at the moment. I'll go ahead and just pull up one of these old queries that I have. Let's see. Yep. So this was a query I did a while ago, pulled in all of the forms that I had. I didn't have any filters apparently. And you can also join forms here. I won't go over that today, but that certainly could be helpful, especially when you're aggregating data across numerous studies. you may want to associate demographic information with your GCS data. And so you can do that through the interface here or offline if you'd like. So this is really the meta study from a data access user standpoint, but the principles for meta study creation and uploading data applies to both use cases. As a data accessor, you could certainly add your scripts here that you use to process the data, to make it reproducible for other users. And then once you're ready to publish, you just simply click publish, and you can create a DOI that you can cite in your publications. So that's really the meta study module in a nutshell. Currently, there are some limitations to individual file size. So right now, the limit is 500 megabytes for an individual file. But if you need to surpass that restriction, you can always reach out to FITBIR operations, and we can help you out with that. With that said, we will be sharing these slides on the public site, and we'll have a slide here with some key contacts. You can always reach out to FITBIR operations if you have any technical issues. And if you are in NINDS TBI funded study with meta study requirements, you will be assigned a FITBIR point of contact that you can reach out to for any assistance. We have some NINDS contacts here and DoD contacts as well. And yeah, you'll definitely want to check out the public site. Let me pull that up too. Because here you can also look through the various user guides here on all the different modules. So we have a meta study user guide that you can download. That'll get you going with the meta study. We also have various tutorial videos available. We have one for meta study, and this links to our BRICS page with all the different tutorial videos. You can watch it in here as well. So we'll be posting these slides here in the events page as well. And you also probably want to check out this data menu. Here you can actually, if you don't have a FITBIR account yet, you can look at our dictionary and see what's published in there as well. This may not be useful for meta study required submission teams because you actually don't have to use these standardized data elements for your study. You'll have your own variables, but you'll want to provide users with a data dictionary to understand your variables. You could certainly look through this dictionary to see some best practices as far as how data dictionary metadata is defined. You can also go ahead and, if you're a data accessor, take a look at the data in the system. So we offer 2 pages to do that. There's a more interactive summary data visualization page, which looks like this, kind of showing you everything that's in the system. Let's say we're only interested in NIH-funded studies. So there's 19 NIH-funded studies with shared data. Let's find track TBI. Click that. You can see some statistics on subject, age range. You can also look at some statistics on how data is being downloaded and submitted over time. So you can see here that this timeline here of downloads over time and how much data has been downloaded. So this could be helpful if you're a data accessor and you're you just want to know what's in the system, how much is in the system. Also some other helpful information here, like studies, how many subjects, records, all in table format. So you could always just download this, process it offline. So I would recommend checking this page out. You can also go to our submitted data page. Here's just some more aggregate statistics of what's in the system, how much of it's private and shared. I have a lot of imaging data here, close to 200,000 separate image series. We also have these tables down here that give you more information about the studies in FITBIR. So repository studies, as I said earlier, these studies were required to submit into the data repository, so they have to confine to CDE standards. And you can look through this table, filter by number of subjects. So we can see the CARE study has the most number of subjects, and I believe records as well. Oh, no, Track TBI has close to 1.3 million records. So that would just be individual rows of data for a participant. You can also look at the meta-study. Meta-studies available. Click that, get some more information on these studies. And also, if you're interested in GCS data that's in the system and also Garcia, we do also provide some statistics on the GCS data that is in the system. Now, this corresponds to studies in the data repository since they do conform to CDE standards, allows us to aggregate this data easily across studies. But if you have GCS study data in the meta study, this summary information will not be able to extract that. So keep that in mind. But for our data repository, this useful visualization shows you for participants what is the sort of trajectory of a GCS value across time. So you can see here, if you're starting at 3, you tend to end in the lower range. Now, if you start at a high GCS value, you tend to end in a high GCS value. Let's also look at quickly Garcia data visualization. So similarly, if you start with a score of 1 and your Garcia assessment, tend to end in lower, although there are some trajectories that end in higher Garcia scores. So we have these various summary tools and visualizations available for you on the public site. I highly recommend checking that out. And with that said, I will end this demonstration, and maybe we can move on to some Q&A if there's any questions out there in the audience. And thank you everyone for your time.
So thanks so much, Kevin. It looks like Mary did have a question as far as does the system check that submitters are using GUIDs that are already within FITBIR? Alison did respond and said that no, there is not a validation check performed. Submitters to a meta study are not required to submit data using GUIDs or pseudo GUIDs. But just like a repository study, all data submitted to a meta study must be de-identified. Did you want to add anything to that?
So I will say if you're a data submitter submitting to the repository, you do need a GUID. But if you're just submitting to the meta study, you do not need a GUID. But as Alison said, the data needs to be de-identified.
Yeah, I'd say the best rule of thumb here with regards to meta study is be a good steward to the community. The more well-defined the data is in terms of how you're structuring that data. As Kevin was showing you earlier, some best practices in terms of like how you're going to actually upload that data and structure that the data sets that are coming in, as well as providing the supporting documentation, as Nsini noted in the kickoff of, fully, explaining, sharing the protocol, sharing, things that you're doing for essays or for your imaging, what types of analyses are being run, all of that, meta information in addition to the actual raw data is what's really going to make this meta study valuable. And also, right, thinking in the future, the more well-defined everything is at the onset of the submission to the meta study, down the road, it will allow users like yourselves who want to do secondary analyses or explore using that data to hopefully not have to come to you or your team. We encourage collaboration and we encourage folks to be working together, but certainly I think you'd much rather have conversations on scientific merit and validation of techniques versus like, hey, I don't understand, what does this particular file mean, right? So I think the better you can annotate the information coming into the meta study, the better it is for the community at large.
And I will make a little plug. In our next software release, we are introducing a forum module. So this will allow FITBIR users to communicate in a shared forum, and you can share best practices, maybe scripts back and forth. So we are trying to encourage more inter-user interaction and engagement. And you can always reach out to ops, though, if you need any assistance with nitty-gritty details.
Thanks so much, Kevin. And Alison, thank you as well for chiming in. Are there any other questions? Feel free to raise your hand or just put a question in the chat, either one. And actually, while we're waiting on that, Matt, Dr. McAuliffe, did you want to add anything in addition to what Kevin went through, maybe as far as future, what the future looks like for the meta study module, or anything that you think would be beneficial?
Sure. Yeah, I think it's really important to annotate your data as best as possible when submitting the data. Again, it's not going into the database where you can query across it, but the more that you annotate it, the easier it's going to be used downstream by yourself or other researchers. So you're really trying to make your data fair. There will be some, over the next 6 months to a year, there are going to be some significant improvements to the user interface, as well as the ability to kind of filter the metadata about a meta study to help you find studies of interest. And the other important aspect that Kevin touched on is that once a meta study does get published, it gets the DOI. This is a data site DOI, and that DOI can be referenced in papers or other documents that where you want to reference the data that you've submitted to to the repository. So again, that's kind of fitting into the whole data model of making data fair and findable.
Thanks so much, Matt. Any other questions before we end early? Dr. Belgowan has a question. Is there a study level metadata form that FITBIR has created that might be useful for meta study data? Matt, would you like to take that one? Or Alison?
Whoop, sorry, yep, it's a little bit slow, but so we don't have a document, but I think what Kevin had showed is that when you go in and do your definition, there's a stepwise process, a workflow that helps you identify all these metadata elements and add them, or appropriately identify information to fill it out. So if you went back to the edit again, Kevin. Here are all the elements. So this is essentially a form online that allows you to edit your meta study appropriately.
Thanks, Matt. There's another question. What is the link for the website to access this webinar recording? So this recording is actually going to be available on the FITBIR website. I believe Dr. Awad is handling the recording process for this, so she can put the link in the chat. But thank you. That's a good question for anyone else that wants to go back and look at this video.
Yeah, we'll have it posted on the events page as well.
Awesome. Awesome. Any other questions? I'm looking at the chat now. Dr. Watson will also post it on the TBI page, the NINDS TBI page. That's correct. And the recording and deck will be available on the FITBIR public site. And thank you for putting that link in the chat box. Any other questions before we conclude?
Not a question, Nsini, but just a comment. I don't know if Kevin had mentioned this. I know he said that there will be a FITBIR operations team member assigned. So once FITBIR operations is made aware that as part of your funding, your NINDS funding award, that you have a requirement for a FITBIR meta study, similar to those who are funded for a repository study, there will be a onboarding call with the PI and the study team to basically go over information that was shared today and have a one-on-one meeting that's, provides very study specific questions directly with FITBIR operations. So again, in addition to kind of materials from today and the webinar recording, you will have an opportunity once funded to have that one-on-one assignment call with FITBIR ops, and then they will be your point of contact throughout the period of performance of your award. So you're not alone.
Thanks, Allison. Any other questions or comments before we end? If not, I just want to thank the FITBIR operations team. So thank you so much, Kevin and Allison. Thank you, Matt, as well. And also on the NINDS side, Hiba and Adele. This presentation and all the background work that goes behind the webinar, the meta study module, was actually a team effort. So thank you so much. And if there's any other questions that come up, please feel free to reach out to FITBIR operations. You can email them and we'll go from there. But thank you so much, everyone. Have a good day.
Bye, everyone.